The Talk Tuah podcast, hosted by Hayley Welch, has received significant attention in recent months. However, despite its growing fan base, it has struggled to meet expectations in terms of quality and substance. As much as the concept behind the show could have been engaging, the execution feels lackluster and ultimately disappointing for anyone hoping for a truly insightful or enjoyable listening experience. Welch, despite her best efforts, simply hasn't managed to create a compelling environment that makes the listener want to keep tuning in. One of the podcast's main issues lies in its lack of direction. The episodes seem to wander aimlessly, with no clear structure or purpose. Welch often jumps from one topic to another without any real connection, leaving listeners unsure of what the episode is about or why they should care. This disjointed approach makes the podcast difficult to follow, and it's easy to lose interest quickly when there's no coherent thread holding the conversation together. The content of the Talk Tuah podcast also falls short. While it may have the potential to dive deep into relevant cultural or social topics, it often ends up scratching the surface. There's little analysis or insightful commentary, which leaves the audience underwhelmed. Welch, though well-intentioned, fails to offer the depth or critical thinking needed to make the discussions truly engaging or valuable. Instead, the show feels like a series of casual ramblings that don't add much to the conversation. Moreover, the quality of the audio in the podcast is far from ideal. Poor sound editing and inconsistent audio levels plague the episodes, making it difficult for listeners to enjoy the content. A podcast is primarily an auditory medium, so audio quality is crucial to its success. Unfortunately, Talk Tuah falls short in this regard, creating an experience that is frustrating rather than immersive. This technical oversight detracts from whatever potential the podcast might have had. Welch's hosting style also leaves much to be desired. Her delivery often feels forced and lacks the natural charisma that many successful podcasters have. There are moments when her enthusiasm seems disingenuous, which breaks the flow of the show and makes it harder to connect with her. A podcast host should have a certain level of charm and authenticity to draw listeners in, but Welch's style doesn't quite achieve that. Her tone often fluctuates between monotone and overly dramatic, which creates an inconsistent listening experience. The guest appearances on Talk Tuah are another weak point of the show. Instead of adding diverse perspectives or interesting insights, many of the guests feel like filler, contributing very little to the conversation. The lack of meaningful interactions between Welch and her guests only serves to reinforce the overall lack of depth in the podcast. With no real chemistry or thought-provoking exchanges, these episodes fail to stand out, leaving listeners disappointed. Another problem with Talk Tuah is its failure to engage with its audience. The podcast does little to build a community around it, missing opportunities for listener interaction and feedback. Successful podcasts often create a sense of belonging or involve their audience in the conversation. But Talk Tuah misses the mark in this area. The lack of engagement makes it feel like the podcast exists in a vacuum, with no real connection to the people who listen to it. The production values of the podcast are also underwhelming. While the visual branding may seem professional at first glance, it quickly becomes apparent that the overall effort put into the production doesn't live up to expectations. The intro and outro music is generic, and there's little attention paid to creating a unique sound or atmosphere. The lack of creative effort in the show's production makes it feel like a rushed, half-hearted endeavour rather than a polished, well-thought-out project. Another issue is the repetitive nature of the topics discussed in Talk Tuah. While there may be occasional flashes of interesting discussions, many episodes circle back to the same ideas without much innovation. This repetitiveness makes the podcast feel stagnant and uninspired, leaving listeners with little reason to continue following it. In order to succeed, a podcast needs to offer variety and fresh perspectives. But Talk Tuah falls into a predictable pattern that doesn't spark curiosity or excitement. Lastly, Talk Tuah's overall impact is minimal. It doesn't inspire deep thought or provoke meaningful discussion. Instead, it feels like background noise that doesn't leave any lasting impression. With so many podcasts available to listeners today, it's hard to see why anyone would choose to invest time in Talk Tuah when there are far more engaging and professionally crafted options out there.